The morning her husband took his last breath, Evelyn was holding his hand and thinking about whether she had turned off the stove. She would never forgive herself for that. Not for the stove was off, but for the thought itself, for the fact that even in the most sacred, shattering moment of her 72 years on Earth, some part of her brain was still somewhere else, still managing, still taking care of something other than the man whose fingers were going cold inside hers. Thomas opened his eyes once near the end, just once. He looked at her the way he had looked at her for 44 years, like she was the only still thing in a moving world. He didn't speak, he didn't have to, but his lips moved slightly, and she leaned down close, her cheek almost touching his, and she heard it. Just her name. Not, "I love you," not, "goodbye," just, "Evie." Quiet as a door closing in another room. And then he was gone. The nurses came, kind women, professional, exactly like the woman Evelyn herself had been for 41 years. They moved with practiced gentleness around the bed, and Evelyn stood at the window and looked out at the hospital parking lot. Gray February, patches of dirty snow, a man scraping ice off his windshield, and she thought, with a clarity that frightened her, "I have no idea who I am without someone to take care of." She went home that evening to a house that never felt so large. She put her coat on the hook. She went to the kitchen. She filled the kettle. And without thinking, without a single conscious thought, she reached into the cabinet and took out 2 cups. She didn't realize it until she was already sitting down at the table. 2 cups, 2 saucers, steam rising from both, and only 1 pair of hands. She stared at that second cup for a long time. The steam thinned, then disappeared. The tea went cold. She never touched it. She left it there all night. Evelyn Ruth Carter had spent 41 years as a pediatric nurse at Hennepin County Medical Center in Minneapolis. Families requested her by name. Children who were terrified of needles would go quiet when she walked in, something in her presence reaching them before her words did. Parents remembered her decades later, stopped her in grocery store aisles, grabbed her hands, said, "You were there the night our son," and couldn't finish the sentence, and didn't need to. She was, by every measure that her generation understood, a good woman. At home, she was no different. Her house on Garfield Avenue had a door that was never fully locked. Neighbors appeared at dinner. Church friends arrived Sunday afternoons without calling first. Every Thanksgiving, the table sat 14 people. Every Christmas, she wrapped gifts until her hands cramped, her back a low, steady fire. And Thomas would come stand in the kitchen doorway in his robe and watch her with that look. Half admiration, half a grief she didn't understand until much later. "Evie," he said one December night, 3 years before he got sick, "when's the last time someone took care of you?" She laughed, kissed him on the cheek, went back to wrapping. He didn't push. Thomas never pushed, but she remembered the way he looked at her when she turned back to the gifts, patient, a little heartbroken, like a man who had said the important thing and already knew it hadn't landed. She understood that look now. 7 years too late, she understood it completely. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in October. Not a dramatic call, not bad news, just her son, David, calling from Denver, cheerful as always, his voice carrying the easy warmth of a man whose life was full and who assumed, without meaning any harm by it, his mother's life was equally full. "Hey, Mom, so listen, we're thinking about coming up for Thanksgiving, all 4 of us. The boys are excited to see you. We'd get in Wednesday evening, leave Sunday morning. That work?" Evelyn stood at the kitchen window. The birch tree Thomas had planted the year they bought the house was losing its last leaves, small yellow coins falling one by one into the gray yard. "Of course," she said. "I'd love that." She hung up and stood there a moment. Then she got out a notepad and began writing the list. Clean the guest room, change the linens, stock the refrigerator. Pot roast or turkey? Both, probably. The boys liked the pot roast, and it wouldn't feel like Thanksgiving without a bird. She would need to start the pie crusts Wednesday morning before they arrived. The good dishes would need to be washed by hand. The bathroom down the hall needed new towels. She wrote for 10 minutes before she stopped. She stood looking at the list. Her hand was already aching from holding the pen, a dull throb in the knuckles that the doctor had told her was the arthritis announcing its permanent residency. She was 79 years old. She was standing in a kitchen that still had Thomas's coffee mug on the shelf where he'd always kept it because she couldn't bring herself to move it, and she was writing a list that would govern the next 3 weeks of her life. And somewhere in the middle of writing it, she felt something she had no name for until she sat with it a moment. Dread. Not of David, not of her grandchildren. She loved them with a fullness that still sometimes surprised her with its force. But she knew what was coming. She knew the 3 days of cleaning beforehand. She knew the cooking, not joyful cooking, but performance cooking, proving you're still capable cooking. She knew the way she would laugh too long at things that weren't that funny because she didn't want anyone to worry. She knew Sunday, when they would load the car with leftovers she'd packed for them and drive away waving, and she would stand at the window watching until the car turned the corner, and then she would go to the couch and not get up again until Tuesday, her body having quietly presented its invoice for the weekend. She knew all of it, and nobody knew about the invoice. That was the part that lived in her chest like a stone, not the exhaustion itself, but the invisibility of it. They saw the meals and the clean house and the grandmother who always had cookies and never complained. They never saw Tuesday. They never saw her lying in the dark at 2 in the morning, her hands so swollen she couldn't close them into fists, thinking, "I love these people. I love them so much, and I cannot do this anymore." She found the photograph 3 days later. She was looking for an extra blanket in the hall closet. The house felt a cold in a way it hadn't when Thomas was in it, as if his absence had changed the temperature permanently, when she found a shoebox on the top shelf, pushed to the back behind the winter scarves. She didn't remember keeping it. She opened it not knowing what she'd find. Inside, a church bulletin from 1987. A dried rose, its petals brown and papery that she couldn't place. A child's crayon drawing of what might have been a house or might have been a boat. And beneath all of it, a photograph. Sophie, 6 years old, pink tutu, a small wooden stage with a blue curtain behind it. The year was 1998. Evelyn sat down on the closet floor. It had been Sophie's first ballet recital, the one Evelyn had missed because the hospital was short-staffed, and a charge nurse had called her at 6 in the morning with a tired voice that already knew it was asking too much. And Evelyn had said yes before the question finished, because yes was the only word her body seemed to know how to form before her mind had a chance to weigh in. She had sent flowers to Renee's house. She had called that evening. Renee had said, in a voice carefully emptied of anything that could be called blame, "It's fine, Mom. Sophie had a wonderful time." And then, a week later, had mailed her a VHS tape without a note. Evelyn had watched it once, Sophie in her pink tutu performing the small, careful dance she had practiced for months. And halfway through, Sophie had stopped looking at the lights and started looking at the audience. Her head moving slowly left, then right. Her eyes moving from face to face with the focused, heartbreaking patience of a 6-year-old who still believed that if you looked hard enough, the person you needed would be there. She looked for a long time. She finished the dance. She took her bow. She never found the face she was looking for. Evelyn pressed the photograph against her chest and sat on that closet floor and cried the way she had learned to cry after 70 years of practice, silently, without drama, with the particular precision of someone who knows that certain losses cannot be undone, only carried. She had been there for other people's children their entire career. She had held hands through the darkest nights on that ward. And she had not been in an audience of 40 parents on a Tuesday evening to watch her granddaughter look for her. After a while, she stopped crying. She sat in the quiet. Then she did something she had not done in years. She talked to Thomas. Not out loud, but in the way she had talked to him since February of his last year, in the language that had no sound. The internal voice that still shaped itself to him, still expected him to answer. She said, "Tom, I think I've been so busy being needed that I forgot to be present." She said, "I think I confused exhaustion with love for so long that I don't know how to tell them apart." She said, "I think you knew. I think you were trying to tell me all those years in the kitchen doorway, and I kept turning back to the wrapping paper." She sat there until her knees began to ache. Then she got up, put the photograph in her cardigan pocket, and went to make a phone call. "David," she said when he picked up. "About Thanksgiving." "Yeah? Everything okay?" "Everything is fine. I'm not going to be able to host this year. I think you all should stay at a hotel if you want to come up, and I would love to see you for dinner one evening, but I can't do a full week, sweetheart. I just can't." Silence on the other end. Not angry silence, surprised silence. The silence of a person who has never had to update a fundamental assumption before. "Mom, are you sure you're okay? You're not—" "I'm 79 years old," she said, gently, the way she used to speak to frightened children on the ward. "My hands hurt in the mornings. My back takes until noon to forgive me for the night before. I love you and those boys more than I know how to say, and I cannot spend 3 days cleaning and cooking and performing being fine when I am tired, David. I'm just tired." Another silence, longer this time. When her son spoke again, his voice was different, quieter. Something had moved in it. "Mom," he said, "why didn't you ever tell us?" She thought about all the Thanksgivings, all the Christmases, all the Sunday mornings she had gotten up and started cooking before anyone else was awake, so the house would smell like effort and love when they came downstairs. She thought about Tuesday, and the couch, and the invoice her body presented every single time. "Because," she said slowly, "I didn't think I was allowed to." David was quiet for a moment. Then, and this undid her, this broke something open in her chest in the best possible way. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know. I should have known." She pressed her free hand flat against the kitchen counter to steady herself. "You know now," she said softly. "That's enough." The changes came slowly, the way all real changes do. Not like a door slamming, but like a window opening, 1 inch at a time, letting air into a room that had forgotten what air felt like. She stopped answering the phone after 8 in the evening. She turned the guest room into a reading room with Thomas's armchair and a lamp with warm light, and shelves for every book she had always meant to get to. She began sleeping until her body decided it was rested. She discovered, at 79, that she loved mornings. Not the mornings she had known for decades, which were about getting ahead of the day, but these new mornings, which were about nothing at all, except the particular quality of early light coming through the east window of the sunroom, and a cardinal on the feeder, and the birch tree moving slowly in the first wind. She put on Thomas's jazz records, Ahmad Jamal, Bill Evans, Chet Baker, whose trumpet in a quiet room sounded like every beautiful thing that had already passed. She let the music move through the house the way he used to move through it, unhurried, filling corners, making the empty rooms feel inhabited rather than abandoned. She was not always at peace. There were nights when the quiet became a weight instead of a gift, and she sat with her hands in her lap and missed Thomas with a sharpness that took her breath away. There were afternoons she picked up the phone to call Renee, and then put it down, not knowing what to say, feeling the distance between them, not geographic, but the other kind, the distance built from years of Evelyn being strong and capable and fine, so consistently fine that her daughter had stopped asking if she really was. But something was shifting. Slowly, imperfectly, the way old things shift. In February, Sophie came alone. She called first, arrived at the time Evelyn suggested, and left, somehow without being told, exactly when Evelyn began to tire. They sat in the sunroom with tea and talked for 2 hours about a book Sophie was reading, and the cardinal, and a dream Evelyn had about Thomas that was peaceful, just the ordinary morning version of him, the one she missed most. Him at the table with his newspaper and his coffee, not speaking, just there. When Sophie left, she held Evelyn in the doorway for a long moment. "You seem different, Gran," she said. "Like you're finally somewhere you actually want to be." Evelyn watched the car until it turned the corner. She stood in the cold air longer than she needed to, letting it touch her face like something real. She thought about the photograph still in her cardigan pocket. She had moved it from cardigan to cardigan for months without thinking about it, the way you keep something you're not ready to put down. Little Sophie on the stage, eyes searching the crowd, looking for a face that wasn't there. That face had been hers. She could not change it. She could not go back to that gymnasium in 1998 and sit in a folding chair in the 3rd row and be the thing her granddaughter was looking for. Some debts cannot be repaid. They can only be acknowledged fully and without excuse, and then carried forward with honesty instead of shame. She went inside. She put the kettle on. She sat in Thomas's chair and opened her book and read until the light outside went gold, then rose, then the deep, quiet blue of a Minnesota evening settling over the city like a hand placed gently on a tired shoulder. The house was still. She was not performing. She was not recovering from having given too much to people who drove home and slept just fine. She was simply there. An old woman in her own house, in the life she had decided, at 79, late and not too late, she was allowed to have. On the mantel across the room, in a small silver frame she had placed there last week, Sophie smiled in her pink tutu. Evelyn looked at her a long moment. Then she looked back at her book. Outside the window, the birch tree Thomas had planted stood tall and bare against a darkening sky, its branches reaching upward in every direction at once, the way very old things reach. Not desperately, but with the quiet authority of something that has survived enough winters to stop being afraid of them. The kettle began to whistle softly. She set down her book. She went to the kitchen. She made her tea. She carried it back to the chair still warm, settled in, pulled the blanket over her knees, and sat in the deep and honestly earned quiet of her own life. She had spent 79 years taking care of everyone else. It turned out she had been worth taking care of all along. She just needed to be the one to finally do it. If this story reached something inside you, if you saw your mother here, or your grandmother, or yourself, please subscribe to the 11th Hour's Last Words. Every story on this channel exists for the people who gave everything and were never told that they deserved something too. Hit subscribe, leave a comment below and tell us, whose face did you see in Evelyn's story? Your words might give someone else permission to finally rest. There is a generation of Americans, nurses, mothers, grandparents, caregivers, who were taught that their worth lived entirely in what they gave. This story says quietly, but without apology, you were allowed to rest. You were allowed to say no. You were allowed to need something. And it is never too late, not at 60, not at 79, not ever, to finally, gently come home to yourself.